One, let's pop live, and we are live. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is 4:43 here in the afternoon, August 30th, 2024, and we are back here in the Weather Center. A little bit more of a serious tone for today's update, just because as a native Floridian, I shared this on my Instagram earlier today, we've seen this before now, and I'm just going to leave it at that. We've seen this before. We know how this movie typically ends when we're faced with a setup of this scenario. However, I want to automatically throw the disclaimer out there. Nothing has formed yet. Nothing is concrete. In fact, earlier today, National Hurricane Center remarkably actually lowered our developmental chances over the next couple of days. They went from 50% before we closed out the evening yesterday to a 40% chance over the next 7 days as we move through the afternoon today. Now, this could uptrend again at 5 p.m. This could go back up at 8 p.m. I would honestly see them putting it back to 8 p.m. Putting it back to 50%, maybe even going 60% with the unanimous agreement that we have from our 12Z model data. So we're going to get started right away. If you guys would not mind, please click in the like button, nudging that like button. We got to remember our trademark slogan here on the Weather Center. Let's nudge that like button. And if you're brand new to the channel, particularly my Caribbean friends and my Floridians out there, please consider clicking subscribe as well so we can talk about this. So first things first, we got to start off with our Goes East full disc satellite shot because we actually have a number of different players on the board here. This is definitely starting to look a little bit more like the approaching peak of the hurricane season. We have one here. This is our homegrown / sloppy system that's just parked off the southwest coast of Louisiana, the northeast coast of Texas, or I should say, I guess, the eastern coast of Texas, providing some rainfall and thunderstorm activity to the coastal areas of Louisiana and Texas. This was recently designated from National Hurricane Center with that good old-fashioned 0 for 20 shot at potential development. It's going to be lingering around as well. The synoptic pattern is not very conducive for this system to rapidly develop. I'm not thinking this is going to go full-on named storm status. It has the low-end potential to do so. That's why National Hurricane Center designated it. In a couple of our models, the Euro probabilities and the Icon particularly do favor spinning up a low and mid-level cyclone with this, with a bit of spin out there already present off the Texas coastline. This is our first one. This is not designated by National Hurricane Center, but this is another MCS / tropical perturbation, we'll call it, parked over the Bahamas, giving Jamaica a lot of actual good thunderstorm activity for Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, a large portion of Cuba underneath some strong thunderstorms late this afternoon, as well as our friends just off the immediate southeast coast in the Bahamas. Lots of really good thunderstorm action, potential severe weather action with this MCS tropical wave feature, or tropical-like feature that's parked over the Bahamas that does have the potential to develop a little of a low pressure area as it moves off towards the northwest, pretty much into the state of Florida. So we'll have to take advantage of the dry conditions we have now. Some daytime thunderstorms wander around our neck of the woods in our viewing area here in Central Florida. You can kind of get a faint picture of it on the satellite shot here. We have that east coast sea breeze wandering towards the west coast of Florida now. Looks like approaching the Gainesville, Ocala, Hillsborough County area and the Tampa, St. Petersburg area right now. This here is going to be the main area. This is our primary suspect, or our key suspect out here developing in the main development region. Now, we're not seeing it forming up rapidly. I'm not expecting this to take off like a rocket ship, at least not yet, to tell you the truth. We have a very favorable setup out ahead of this system, downstream into the central and western Caribbean, and particularly the Gulf of Mexico. As you can see, convection this afternoon right along that monsoonal trough as we finally start to see a bit of a breaking down of this effect. Doesn't look the most impressive. We have some fairly warm cloud tops with it, some moisture with it, but nothing overly impressive. But this is likely to change as we go over the next 5 to 7 days. So that's another kicker here, folks, as you're watching and you're tuning in wherever it is you may reside, whether you're in the Gulf Coast, and the western half of the Caribbean, Cuba, Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, even Belize and the Yucatan Peninsula. We're going to be keeping a close eye on your area as well with this system, because since we haven't developed a full organized cyclone yet, a trackable disturbance, we're naturally faced with that wide swath of not only our ensemble individual members, but our deterministic models going wide left and wide right. but I particularly want to emphasize this because we do have a pattern in place for it to punch right through the Lesser Antilles. Again, been saying that on a repetitive basis, almost been a marathon this entire hurricane season. We've been at a fairly steady and low frequency rate of named storms, but it seems like every single system out there that does get going across the Atlantic Basin just naturally favors a track through the Lesser Antilles. Ernesto is a bit more Leeward Island oriented. Beryl, as we saw, barreled through the Windward Islands with only residual effects to our Leeward Islands on the northern side of that volcanic island chain. This is going to be the one that I really want us to pay attention to, and honestly, over the last 24 hours, realistically speaking, if I'm being very honest with you guys, the models are still very, the deterministic models, I'll say, are still very about it. The European model has been a bit inconsistent, however, consistent with the formation of this system. It's just a matter of when. The GFS has been kind of bonkers, to tell you the truth. The Icon, the German model, has been very consistent with this system as well. And the Canadian model has kind of been consistent. It's been okay. So right now, the two models I want to lean on are going to be the Euro, naturally, and then the German model, of course. The GFS has been a bit troublesome. It's been very roller coaster-ish. We come to very high weenie runs, and then we go way back down to a plateau. So I'll talk you through all that here in a moment. And then finally, last but not least, we have our other area of investigation, or our other area of interest, just upstream of that, to the south of the Cabo Verde Islands. This feature is going to try to punch west, but as our upstream feature, our leading feature here continues to progress towards the west and west-northwest, it's going to allow the backside pattern to modify and open up a path of least resistance towards the north here and allow this to hopefully escape up and out. Some of the ensembles do want to try to sneak this a little bit closer for comfort. Not into the Lesser Antilles, not into the Caribbean, thankfully, but still something to keep an eye on because it's just another player on the game board. Moving on over to our water vapor satellite shot for the Atlantic Basin, you can see this is going to be the area in question right there. We've had some fairly decent inflow to this system over the last 24 hours. A little bit of extra embedded vorticity just out ahead of it. That was a bit of a concern, and that's why this is still a fairly sensitive setup. As our monsoonal trough breaks down, if it were to rapidly break apart into different segments of vorticity, energy, and precip, that could hurt our developmental chances. So this is still not necessarily a marginal case, but this is a conditional case. If you guys recall during our severe weather coverage back in the winter, the fall, the early springtime, we had mentioned conditional stability, conditional instability. In this case, this is a conditional setup, at least for the next 2 to 4 days. We are not hard sold on a tropical storm moving through the Lesser Antilles. In fact, I would argue that we're probably going to see this develop after it gets into the Eastern Caribbean. If it develops sooner, like the German model is indicating, this gives us a better chance of escaping a direct hit to the Gulf of Mexico coastline and the Yucatan. Problem with that is we're going to be faced with a stronger system approaching Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, Haiti, the eastern tip of Cuba, possibly Jamaica. We'll have to wait and see. At this point, guys, the primary concern with this, despite having not developed in the short term, is going to be the fact that as it continues westward, we're only going to see impacts with this feature increase, regardless of development. I'm sure you all have heard that before as well. Regardless of development, these are the impacts that you're likely to witness with this feature, and that's kind of the case here. As it moves through the Lesser Antilles and on approach to the Antilles, our impacts and the influence this will have on our local weather conditions, whether it be just some garden variety thunderstorms, some elevated winds, all the way to the potential of flooding and higher elevated tropical-like winds, they're only going to go up over the next couple of days, especially as we get past the Labor Day holiday for us here in the United States on September 2nd. Then upstream of that, you can see our dry air is a non-factor. There's still some folks out there mentioning dry air, but looking at the mid-level water vapor, our dry air is well off towards the north. Dry air is almost a non-issue at this point in time. It's just going to be that monsoonal trough and a little bit of that continued upper-level easterly shear that's coming off of Africa that's also slowly but surely tapering off. So the tropics are finally starting to get into a more favorable situation as opposed to the unfavorable conditions that had us locked down like the pandemic back in 2020 for much of the back end of August. Here's a look at our chart as well. This is National Hurricane Center's homepage, and we're finally getting that look. Hashtag has the look. This is our homepage setup. We're going to go from left to right. Here's our 10 for 20. Actually, you know what? I got that wrong, guys. I probably should have looked at this a little bit closer. This is our AOI off the Texas-Louisiana coastline. This is expected to meander near the coast through much of next week, and some slow development is possible if it remains offshore. Regardless of development, there it is. Heavy rains could cause some flash flooding across portions of coastal Louisiana and the upper Texas coast during the next few days, so we're definitely going to keep an eye on that. We have been watching it. My buddy Mike in the chat here, him and I have been shooting the breeze behind the scenes, talking about it, meandering off the coast, and him and I called it. He hit it right on the money, as a matter of fact, mentioning that this thing is probably going to get that textbook yellow blip from National Hurricane Center, with it being parked off the coast and marinating over those 31 to 33 almost degree Charlie temps out there. It's another area that has a lot of us forecasters concerned, is the fact that we haven't had a system, very strong anyways, wander through the Gulf of Mexico. After Beryl and Alberto, with the wide precip field that Alberto carried, becoming a gyre tropical storm before moving into Mexico, we did see a little bit of our surface waters cool. However, the ocean heat content did not really go anywhere. Our systems moved a little too fast, and they weren't strong enough to exhaust a lot of that subsurface energy. And that, truthfully, is what has a lot of the big brains in tropical meteorology concerned with this system, and why we're seriously wondering at this point, are the models really on the ball with this? If you recall, during Beryl's life cycle, we were under forecasting it severely for a number of days while this thing was moving to the Caribbean. We didn't nail that Category 5 intensity nearly at all. The GFS did not. The GFS called for the initial rapid intensification, but from there on in, it dropped the ball. The Euro dropped the ball. Icon tried its best. The Canadian heavily dropped the ball. So we're really wondering if that feature out there that's highlighted right now, this guy for the 0 for 40, we're wondering if this has the potential to not replicate Beryl, but rapidly intensify more than the models are indicating right now. And that's kind of the kicker, folks, to tell you the truth. I know that it's still a long-range forecast, but to tell you the truth, bottom line, the ball is in the system's court. We have a dominant synoptic pattern out there for North America. We have a dominating subtropical ridge and an area of high pressure that's going to be meandering over Bermuda that's going to allow this system to travel westward. The ball is literally in the system's court. There isn't too many other moving pieces here. If this system develops early and intensifies quickly, we have a higher chance of it gaining latitude and finding a way to punch north before it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, or before it crashes and burns into Central America or the Yucatan Peninsula, like we saw Beryl do before getting into the Bay of Campeche. If it develops later, which, to tell you the truth, our GFS and the European models for 12 Zulu did a phenomenal job of indicating this, and I'm going to talk you through that as well, because even though it's one model run, the consistency is something worth monitoring. Now, I'm sure it's probably going to go out the window at 18 Zulu, especially when we get our GFS happy hour run. This thing's probably going to either be in Texas or back to New Orleans or something like that, or not on the charts at all, because the GFS has been very dramatic and sporadic in that form all throughout the hurricane season. But we're going to keep an eye on it. That's going to be our main player. And this guy out here, we have an 0 for 20 still. That's the token 0 for 20 ratio. And this is expected to form up somewhere in the mid portions of the Atlantic MDR before coming up towards the north and eventually punching through the higher latitudinal areas of the subtropics and dissipating before it can actually play a role on anyone's weather. Here's a look at the steering flow. I'm going to bring this up now so we can just kind of talk about what it is that we have out there, and I'm going to also highlight our areas of suspicion. So there is our little cyclone out there right along the coast, actually, of the Houston, Texas area. It's literally sitting on the beach for all intents and purposes at 850 millibars. That is our mid-level cyclone just off the immediate coastline, or right on the, like I said, the beach line of Texas, providing a lot of good onshore flow to Louisiana, which is why your rain chances have been going up over the last couple of days, as well as helping to feed the flow over Florida and help to expedite our East Coast sea breeze punching from the coastline all the way towards the West Coast and into the Gulf of Mexico. So that system's helping to bring us some decent and much-needed rainfall for the Gulf Coast for Mississippi and Louisiana, and helping to up our East Coast sea breeze, kind of give it a little bit of supplementation as it moves across the peninsula. Here's our next feature. This is the one in question. So you can see that there is a little bit of spin to it. We have really good easterly and northeasterly flow along the northern axes of it and very strong westerly flow on the back side of it or on the south quadrant of it, the southwest corner of it, helping to kind of create a bit of a very flat but cyclonic orientation to it. And then here's our other wave that's upstream of that. Textbook, that's how you can see the difference between these two systems. This is tropical in nature, but monsoonal in nature. This is a lot more bona fide tropical. That's why I have this in a circle and this in a square. Two different source regions, but still the same relevant threat to everybody out in front of them. And then this is going to be our mid-level flow. Once again, this is 850 millibars brought to us by windy.com. There is our anticyclone parked across the greater Atlantic, just like so, driving a lot of really good easterlies flow from the African coast through the Caribbean. You can see our trade winds are flowing right through the eastern and central Caribbean basin across Honduras and Nicaragua and into the East Pac. Same thing go here with the difluence we have over the islands flowing up towards the Bahamas and into the southeast United States. This is not going anywhere. This is not going anywhere. What happens up here still is a little questionable, and we're going to pay very close attention to it, but again, the ball is in this feature's court. Let's jump right into it. So these are going to be our 12Z probabilities from the European model. This is the blend of probabilities, and I'm going to jump right to 144 hours because if you look at the title of this chart, these are our hurricane probabilities. Like I said, we're getting right into it. We're ripping the Band-Aid off. And as you can see, these are our hurricane probabilities in the Caribbean. So our hurricane probs, the blend of probabilities, are already lighting up to the immediate south of Hispaniola, pointed towards Jamaica. If you go to 168 hours out, this only expands further through the southwest corner of Haiti, over top Jamaica, and towards the Cayman Islands. So like I said, regardless of development, we are going to feel this system as it breaks away from the monsoon trough, and even other forecasters out there across the X, the Twitter sphere, on other social media platforms are pointing out that this is interesting to see that our probabilities have already gone up this far out in time before a feature even develops. And if you look to 192 hours to 216 hours, and then finally the end of the 10-day window, we have that natural discontinuity headed up towards Florida, going through the Yucatan Channel up towards the coastline of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. And I'm not going to go bullseyeing any individual state at this point in time because, again, we do not have a closed circulation. We do not have an invest. We do not have a named storm. So we're still going to see some fairly dramatic fluctuations. Hopefully, as we get closer in time to this 10-day mark, the 7 to 10-day window, as we wander through this weekend, we should hopefully not only see a coherent signature in our real-time feature, but as we close the window of time, our models hopefully will stop swinging wide left and wide right, and they'll start to dial in a more general consensus and a more realistic outcome. But this is definitely something worth watching immediately, regardless of if there's anything on the platform, because again, these are hurricane probabilities. And as we all know, especially with the euro and how frugal and conservative it can be by nature, it is like going to the dentist and pulling teeth for this thing to highlight the potential for even a tropical storm. And for us to see beyond 7, 10, 12 days, hurricane probabilities over some very heavily populated areas, this just bears watching, period. You can't argue it. Regardless of where this thing goes, we need to watch it very closely. Here's a look at our tropical storm probabilities. We'll take it down a notch, and you can see, again, fairly consistent signal across the Caribbean basin, scraping the southern periphery of Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, potentially really impacting the weather for Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, and then from there is when we see that split decision. We see a lot more of our agreement head up towards the Florida Peninsula, the Florida Panhandle, the Big Bend, a couple of ensemble probabilities getting up closer to the New Orleans area, Biloxi, Mississippi area, and then a couple of them being indicated in the Bay of Campeche, but it's also very interesting to note that there are some rogue signals, some rogue individual ensemble plots that do suddenly sprout from the Bay of Campeche. So still maybe a gyre signal there. We shall see. But when we look at the individual plots, pay no attention to all the random weaker ones that go this way and this way. It's a very convoluted signal, but if you sift through it, And in fact, I'll show you guys the active cyclones as opposed to the spaghetti plots. As soon as we get to the next page, I'll switch it over so we can actually track it a little bit better. You can see that the general consensus favors a very familiar turn for a lot of us native Floridians. And then there's also a garbled mess of spaghetti that comes out of the Bay of Campeche from across Mexico and the Yucatan that distorts the signal and makes it look like it could go anywhere from Texas to Florida. And with that being said, let's move right on in. So these are the GFS plots first. The GFS, again, I don't know what's going on with this model. The ensemble plots and the deterministic runs for this model just do not match at all. The deterministic GFS either doesn't develop it or it punches it into Louisiana or Texas. Most recently at 12 Zulu, it did bring it back towards the east and showed a Panama City landfall for a major hurricane. And I give it just a little bit more grace. I put a little bit more stock, just a little bit, obviously. This is a long point ahead in time, but given this is a hot model run and not a 6 or an 18Z run, a continuity run, since it is a 12 Zulu, I put just a little bit more stock into it. I remember having a conversation behind the scenes, mentioned to a couple of the chats I'm a part of, that I'm glad to see a 12Z run showing something like this that's worth discussing and tearing down or breaking it down, as opposed to a 6Z and an 18Z. Nowadays, continuity runs, they're run off of the short-range forecasting from the 0 and 12Z data as well as the assimilated analysis data. So they're okay. They're fairly reliable, but I love getting that fresh data into the models across the spectrum, and I pay a little more attention to 0 and 12 Zulu. As you can see here, for our 12Z GFS ensembles, we have a couple of members coming up towards the Big Bend in the panhandle of Florida, but again, they're not really meshing with the deterministic GFS, and its initial conditions are also underselling the amount of moisture, precip, and thunderstorm action we already have out there with our monsoonal trough and in the greater Atlantic, the central to western Atlantic basin. Now I'm going to switch the chart here. These are our cyclone locations. I'm going to move over to active cyclones so you can see exactly what I was talking about, because the European model has not backed down from its depiction. The ensembles, I should say. If you go to 12 Zulu yesterday, I'll take you through, since we didn't talk yesterday, I'll show you what 12 Zulu yesterday showed us. A fairly consistent agreement that we're going to see something developing and then finally kicking up towards the north and east with a few other ensembles, very strong ensembles. Look at this 924 millibar bona fide Category 5 system right here. Obviously, that's one of 51 members, so don't put a whole lot of faith and confidence into that. But you can see the swath here was fairly wide once we get beyond that 70 west longitude line. Very textbook for this hurricane season. You've probably seen other channels mention it. I've mentioned it a number of times starting back in mid-May to June that we're going to see a lot more of our discontinuity, I feel like, with these western tracking systems around the 70 west longitude line. But again, very solid signal here. This is a number. This is about half of our ensemble suite for sure. So again, this is a confidence signal. We're watching at this point. You go over to 0Z, a little bit more concerning. A little bit more concerning. Without the additional hyperbole, this is definitely something us Floridians will take a third, if not a fourth glance at. Again, I posted it on my Instagram story earlier today. We've seen how this movie ends. If you've lived in the state of Florida for more than a decade now, we know how the big picture ends. Whenever we have a developing system coming up down towards the south of Cuba, missing or either going over the Cayman Islands, around this time of the year, either late August and through September with the fall pattern trying to take hold, we know how it ends. This was 0Z, and notice that, unfortunately, we've lost a number of our ensembles that do show a more out-to-sea track after entering the Caribbean. We have a lot more of our stronger solutions moving over Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic is not out of the woods yet, Cuba. The Cayman Islands have a large consensus of fairly strong ensembles moving over that area, so we're watching for a lot of people. Again, we are not narrowing this down to one particular location. We are looking at everyone right now. And I've said it before, and I'm sure you've heard other meteorologists say it as well. Whenever something gets in the Caribbean, it's game on. We need to start watching from pretty much all angles. So this was 0Z, and then 12Z, we've only seen the uptick. And again, We know we've seen this story play out before. We've seen this story and how it ends, and you can see that there are a large number of ensemble members that go up through Jamaica, kind of following almost an Irma-esque track, and then up through the state of Florida, and then back out, curving around the western periphery of our subtropical high. Couple of ensemble members, 1, 2, that show a more kind of escape route, impacting a lesser amount of people after unfortunately bulldozing Haiti, Cuba, and parts of the Bahamas. But then the rest, this one or this one, a out-to-sea track, because that strong of a system is definitely going to impact Nassau, its neighboring Bahama Islands, as well as the southeast corner of Florida, fairly heftily as a strong hurricane. And then, like I had mentioned, look at these random ensemble plots coming up out of the Bay of Campeche that kind of garble the signal a little bit. If I switch back over to our regular cyclone locations and I track it through a time, you can see there are some random members that shoot up and out of the Bay of Campeche. Unfortunately, still bulldozing Florida, bullseyeing Florida, the panhandle that is, from about Apalachicola over to Pensacola. This is, that's a fairly confluent, convergent signal. We still want to continue to watch for Louisiana and Mississippi. We have a small cluster. We have about 4 to 5 ensemble members that take a fairly robust system into the New Orleans area, the Biloxi area, the Keesler Air Force Base region. But there you have it. And these are obviously going to be our strongest members. There is that pressure bias with the European ensembles on this website. We can switch over to Weather Nerds very quickly before we segue to the next portion of the brief, just so we can show you what the ensembles look like without that pressure bias, and we can get a better feel for what's going on out there. And there you have it. We have a number of them just reaching up and in. And I know we have a number of them down here in the central Gulf of Mexico, but then going back to the control member of the Euro and the actual deterministic Euro, which is coming up next, I can see a sharp right-hand turn back towards the state of Florida. And again, I'm saying this confidently because we've seen this before. And not to sound silly or cheesy, but flippin' 13-year-old David saw this with Hurricane Charlie back in 2004. And for those of you who care, I have the VHS tapes on my dad's big old camcorder from back in the day where I was constantly standing in front of the television with my little pen microphone. It's coming to Florida. That cold front's going to move it to the east. And we all know how that movie ended once again. Here's a look at our 12Z GFS. I'm going to quickly scroll through it because, again, the GFS, I'm not putting a ton of faith in it. You can see our feature right here, very disorganized, very sloppy. If I switch over to the vorticity at 850 millibars, it is trackable. It is there. In fact, I'll just kind of leave us on this chart so we can see it a little bit more clear. Taking a track just to the south, if not right over top Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, and then turning up, doing that fateful cruise right between the Yucatan Channel of Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula, getting picked up by our frontal system here. There's that front. There's our high pressure in the mid-levels. This is our 850 millibar upper front. You can see the trailing edge, the appendage here of yellow vorticity indicating the lift of our frontal boundary. There's the backing winds. You have your northerly and northwesterly flow coming up out of the Midwest, the Ohio River Valley, and then our return flow in the warm sector of it. Warm front somewhere in through here. That's where this system is going to go. Your call is there, and since this is a stronger feature, it's naturally going to want to plow right into that path of least resistance. And there it is. There's that right turn. And I remember talking with a bit of the goosebumps going on, the chicken skin, because this is precisely what we saw with Ian. If you were following Mike's weather page and a number of other sources, because I was not on YouTube back then. I had just recently moved back to Florida. I just separated from the Air Force, and I distinctly remember bombarding my family members with model run after model run after model run when Ian was developing in the Caribbean. And I distinctly remember that GFS, throughout Ian's life cycle, always had it to the west. Ian was forecast to hit the panhandle by the GFS again and again and again. And it even got to the point where the Euro kind of bought into it, and I remember that the National Hurricane Center track had it into the panhandle at one point, and then I woke up one morning and it just shifted back east. So I'm glad the GFS is moving over. If I go back to 6 Zulu, look at how much further to the west it was. And I don't know about this one. I really don't. This is a massive fluctuation in our steering pattern. This is again the 6Z model run. These are individual runs, so don't put a ton of faith or start freaking out just looking at these individual models. We're looking for a consensus. We're looking for a consensus, and consistency run to run to run. And right now we don't have that. The only thing we have is it has trended back towards the east, putting Florida back on the game board, and this is a bit more of, personally, a more realistic outcome. So we're going to have to pay very close attention to this, and I mean very close, because everybody from the Caribbean islands to the state of Florida, the whole Gulf of Mexico coastline, we've seen this before. If we come on over to the latest 12Z European model, the operational run, the deterministic, you can see that the European model is a little slow to develop it. We have a closed low-pressure center, maybe a tropical depression, as it moves through the Lesser Antilles to the south of Puerto Rico, hoping by this point early next week, this is September 3rd, middle of the afternoon, or I should say right around the lunch hour, hopefully we have a closed invest area that we can pay attention to and get some hurricane data in. As you take it through time, and this is what I had mentioned earlier that has my eyes wide open. Obviously, I'm not going to sound the alarm yet. I wanted to give it another full model cycle of 24 hours, and we have seen that margin of inconsistency close a little bit. And what has me very concerned is the GFS. I'll switch over to the GFS one more time, and we'll go to the mean sea level pressure and precip. Very slow to develop here on this run, but if you notice, as soon as it gets into the Western Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, 995 millibars, 992, 989, 980, 974, 969, 960, 961, and then a landfall. If you come over to the European model, if you look at 180 hours out from now, this is less than 10 days, we are already down to 984 millibars, 983, 980, 980, 976, brushes the Yucatan, so obviously we're going to have that land interaction, and then immediately into the Gulf of Mexico, 975, 971. The reason I'm mentioning this to you guys from a forecaster perspective is something was ingested by the models today at 12Z that has all of them. The Canadian, the Icon, the GFS, and the Euro all indicating a potential window for rapid intensification. And if this happens closer to the Western Caribbean, closer to the Gulf of Mexico, it makes that latitudinal gain, that shift back towards the north and east, a lot more of a realistic and doable outcome. We're going to switch over to a different AOI. We're looking at our thickness for the United States so I can show you guys why it is that I do believe that the shift back to the east is a bit more realistic than this thing just going and taking a barrel path. We're at a very different in a very different environment than we were back in late June, July. We're seeing a shifting in our planetary pattern because we're going to be going out of summer pretty soon. It is August 30th. I believe the first day of fall is September 20th, September 22nd. So slowly but surely, as we get closer to fall, we're going to see that shift in our jet stream pattern. We're going to start to see more amplified and deeper systems and a potential return to severe weather for the mainland United States, as well as more progressive and more amplified troughs as they dig down over the plains, through the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and down into the Mid-Atlantic and the Southeast. So I'm going to fast forward the run to the tail end. There is our cyclone down here in the southern Gulf of Mexico, immediately north of the Yucatan. And obviously, we're going to have to watch this. We'll have to pay close attention. We're going to see if there are any more dramatic shifts in our pattern, because that'll be extremely telling. But I know Climate Prediction Center, between the very end of August, in fact, I believe now is when their charts are valid for August 30th through to September 12th, they are predicting cooler than average temps over the eastern United States, which tells me immediately trough. Positive P&A pattern with a trough and a building ridge, and this sells that perfectly. If you look at our thickness lines, you have the red thickness here going all the way up into western Canada, and then our troughing down over the eastern United States, supporting a pretty dominant mature wave down at the surface over Quebec and sweeping through the northeast. As a result, again, There's a really wonderful frontal chain that's draped down through the Gulf Coast into the western Gulf of Mexico. And we have seen this before. Charlie, Ian, Michael with Wilma. We've seen this play out many times before. This is not a scenario, folks, where this goes towards Louisiana and goes towards Texas. This solution here anyways, again, subject to change. We don't have a closed system. We don't have anything formed up just yet. We don't even have very high National Hurricane Center probabilities right now, so we're simply analyzing the pattern for what it is as it stands this afternoon. But this is not a Louisiana-Texas outcome. This is most definitely a Florida impact. I'm not going to sell it to you any differently. I'm not going to pad it up to try to not sound, oh, you're just trying to get the views. I'm telling you, I've lived through major hurricanes. I'm literally, a lot of you in the chat, I'm sure, have lived through it. We just know it. PM, Mike, everybody in the chat who's been with this channel for a while now, you all know. I don't need to be on YouTube trying to get clicks or views or subscribers to tell you, yeah, that's definitely a Florida issue. With that front draped down towards the south and as strong of a system as forecast, that thing's going to boomerang back towards the right. I saw the 12Z European model run before the full-length model run came out in the ensembles and the control member, and I told my buddies in the chat, yeah, that thing's going to turn hard right. That's definitely going to turn hard right. That is not going into New Orleans. That is not going to Houston. And the control member of the Euro, I'm telling you, you just see these things. This is the 12Z extended European model, and this shows a major hurricane landfalling somewhere between Steinhatchee and Cedar Key once again, depending on the synoptic pattern and how quick this thing turns. But if I go back to 144 hours, 210. This actually shows it a little bit further towards the west, as a matter of fact. This is our ensemble control member here, showing it a little further west, or no, east. I'm sorry, east. I always do that. I don't know why I butcher my compass rose. If you remember, the operational model had it a little bit more towards the left. Here's our control member, all of our individual ensembles from the European model put together into the general thinking, having it just a bit more towards the east, developing and deepening rapidly once again. And then you can see, as soon as that thing interacts with the front, hard right turn. Hard right turn right there, almost, I would say like about a 75 degree turn right there. Boom. And we know, we've seen this before. We've definitely seen it before. This is not unfamiliar territory. We just have to see exactly what this system does over the next 72 to 96 hours. Once it gets into the Caribbean, how it looks, if it develops sooner, if it develops later, that is going to be very telling. Let me see what I have up next. This is just going to be a look at the pattern across North America. You can see the GFS has a trough building in that's going to open up that path of least resistance for the eastern Gulf of Mexico, but it progresses it fairly quickly and allows some very anomalous ridging to build in over the northern Canadian territories and central Canada. I believe this is Ontario and Manitoba. Or no, this is Saskatchewan. I'm sorry. We have British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario, yada, yada, yada. So central and northern Canadian territories, it allows a ridge to topple over and cut off the cool air that's supporting our trough axes, and that's why the GFS does not move it off towards the east as fast. If we switch over to our European model at 12Z, you can see we have a positively tilted long wave trough that is marinating over the eastern half of the United States. Not nearly as progressive of a ridge. You can still see the dominant subtropical ridging that builds in over the western CONUS, over the Four Corners, through Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas, and up into Saskatchewan and Manitoba. So that's going to be the kicker here. We're going to have to see. We're going to have to wait and see. We still have lots of time to scrutinize, but if this is the pattern right there that we are faced with a system moving up into the Caribbean, it's game on. Everyone needs to pay attention. And that's something that we don't need to look at models for, ladies and gentlemen. That's not for the views. That's not for all the hyperbole. That's not for the social media. You know, and forgive me if this sounds callous, but I've got my gig lined up. I don't need the clicks. I don't need the subscribers. I love you guys, and I love our community. So at this point, I'm not saying anything to work on my views or work on the clout or anything like that. I am not. I'm just telling you through experience, living through it before social media, even before becoming a professional weather forecaster. I've seen this before, and I know exactly how it turned out. So if this is the pattern that we are faced with as a potentially organizing system is moving through the Caribbean, it's game on. We're going to have to really buckle down and pay close attention to it. And that's all I've got, guys. That's everything for today. I've got plans this evening with the family. We're going to be taking advantage of the Labor Day weekend and trying to enjoy as much as we can before we hopefully see what happens over the next several days. But unanimous agreement that this feature is likely to develop. Again, I would anticipate. In fact, let's go over to National Hurricane Center right now and see if they've updated our 5 o'clock. No, I guess they're going to update us again at 8 p.m. They'll update us at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll have to see if our developmental probabilities go back up. I would definitely argue to National Hurricane Center, we should probably bring this up to a 50-60 over the next 7 days. I'm not going to go gung-ho and go all the way to a red zone, 70, 80, 90. We're not there yet. We could definitely see this collapse overnight all over again. This has been a very frugal and a very conditional setup, but there you have it, guys. Do we have any questions at all? Nancy Shanks, thank you very much. And I'm going to re-emphasize that again, guys, for any new viewers in here, anyone watching or anyone returning, I can promise you, from the bottom of my heart, God is my witness, this is far. I honestly couldn't care less about upping my views, upping my subscribers. I'll caveat that by saying I love each and every one of you who trust me with your weather content, with your weather forecasts to convey these types of serious situations and information to you guys. So please don't take that and manipulate it to, oh, he doesn't want us to watch, he doesn't care about us. It's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to explain to you that this is not about the fun or the excitement or the hype behind it. This is me just trying to be as 100% down to earth and realistic with you, because this puts me in harm's way too. This isn't something I'm going to be broadcasting from my house in North Dakota that doesn't get hit by hurricanes. That's why I'm telling you, through personal experience, we've seen this movie before. This is a rerun. It's like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme out there. You guys are probably familiar with it, where he goes... We've seen that before. In fact, I feel like that's a very telling GIF or meme for this type of pattern. Mike, how do you feel about that pattern staying true 10 days out? We're going to have to wait and see. I want to say by the time we are 5 days away, we will have a very clear understanding of what's coming. Because right now, being so far out, I've noticed anything beyond 200 hours, and we are still well beyond that. If you notice, the 10-day window is 240 hours. That is the end of the European model suite. I would say anything under 200 hours is when we slowly but surely really get an understanding of what the large-scale pattern will look like, and we can begin to nail down the smaller features that influence the large-scale pattern. So I would say let's give it another few days. Let's check back on, I was going to say Saturday, that's tomorrow. Let's check back on Labor Day, if not Tuesday, and we'll start to go from there, because I know that there are still some pretty big fluctuations in terms of our deterministic models. The ensembles, on the other hand, this is as a matter of fact, yeah, now that I mention it, I'm glad I was smart enough to pull this up. This is our GEFS, geopotential heights, guys. And these are our ensemble prediction system, our EPS ensemble mean here. I'm not using a deterministic model. The deterministic models, the one and done kind of get the model data and then run for the hills, they're going to change extravagantly. So we're looking at the ensembles all day, every day until something forms. Then we can get closer in time and start looking at our deterministic models and see how close they get to our ensembles. That's the problem here. You see runs like this at 0Z where there's pretty much nothing out there. We get another random Alberto. I don't know why the GFS has loved the Bay of Campeche so much. If you look earlier in the run, we get a Chris 2.0 on the 0Z GFS. That's why I'm not trusting it. What even is that? GFS, what are you doing? Why are we repeating June of 2024? There's not going to be another Alberto. There's not going to be another Chris. And there's our system that once again plunges into the Bay of Campeche, looking very reminiscent of what we saw with Tropical Storm Alberto at the very beginning of the hurricane season. We go from this to this. That's, no, please do not buy any confidence, don't put any allegiance, and don't buy into any other source out there that is promoting strictly individual model runs of our deterministic models. No, big fallacy. Big fallacy. Right now, we really need to lean in on our ensembles, and that is why I led the way with these probabilities, because that is undoubtedly something that has everyone's eyebrows raised as high as they can go, especially the individual ensemble members here. Coming from the European model, not only are we seeing a lot of red and pink indicating major hurricane status, but they're tracking up towards areas that are particularly very heavily populated and very familiar with major hurricanes. Yeah, that's not a good look. That is definitely not a good look. That even if we didn't have anything on our deterministic models, I would argue that is still something very much so worth watching. Definitely something very much worth watching, period. And I would honestly say, if I had to once again give you a very blindfolded, shot in the dark in the dartboard, if this system were to get going around Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, pushing up towards the Yucatan Channel, it's going to be a southeast United States issue. Somewhere Florida is going to feel this system. So, Robbie Lynn McCrary, I agree. I definitely agree. I really agree. We are at the point in time where the ceiling that's what's also scary to a lot of us meteorologists out there, is the fact that we can hype this, we can talk about one model run, etc. We can talk about the GFS bringing it into New Orleans, we can talk about the GFS not developing it, but the problem with a peak hurricane season threat in an area like this is we have a huge floor and a huge ceiling. And the ceiling being Category 4, Category 5. The floor being nothing happens. So it doesn't really help our expectations at all. If you were looking back at Debbie or Alberto and Chris, realistically, with that point in the hurricane season, we have a smaller margin of error. The floor, nothing happens. The ceiling, tropical storm. Alberto, Chris, etc. proved that to us. Beryl was a huge anomaly, a huge record-breaking historic storm that will be talked about and will be investigated for likely decades to come, if not through the next decade. So we're not going to talk about that one, but when we're talking about it season by season from about the 1950s to the 2020s, realistically speaking, we are at the point in the hurricane season where our ceiling goes way up. The ceiling is now major hurricane status. It is no longer, tropical storm or a sloppy homegrown system. No, now we are at the August and into September peak of the season to where we need to start speculating, is this going to go hurricane? Is it going to go major hurricane? But that's all we got for you guys. We're going to go ahead and end the live stream before we start getting into that huge speculation territory. I don't want to go there. We are still only investigating and we are only in monitor mode. But the key takeaway for everyone watching right now, if there's anything that you pull from this live stream, is going to be we watching. There is something that does bear monitoring, and there is something that does bear respect. Not going to say concern, not going to say worry, not going to say stress, just respect. Because we've been here before. Our Caribbean friends and our Central America friends have been there before. We all cheers to everybody out there who are hurricane survivors. We all know. We all know what to expect. We all know how unpredictable and how these things can change, but we are all still very familiar with how this plays out. And so with that being said, I feel this is a situation that deserves the close attention and the respect. That's the big thing. And April Claremont, happy birthday to me. I need to watch for a hurricane. I'm very sorry about that. Hopefully that isn't the case here, but the running joke over at WKMG is my first couple of days in the hot seat with them are going to be trial by fire, and it almost seems like Mother Nature is working in that sort of fashion. So if you're a firm believer in Murphy's Law, that only reinforces the fact that we're probably going to be tracking something as we go through the first and second week of September. It's literally the running joke between Jonathan Kagas and I over at WKMG is watch, the hurricane season just going to be quiet, very quiet until I hit the road or hit the ground running and I'm in the broadcaster chair or in the digital chair. So we'll see. It almost seems like that's exactly what's going to happen. Yep, exactly. Baptism by fire, PM, the perfect way to put it. Grand Cayman, thank you very much for watching. Will, we're going to be paying very close attention to that area. You can see we have a lot of spaghetti flowing right over top that area. And we're not talking the fabulous Italian dinner. We're talking tropics. And Jamaica as well. You guys are in the spotlight once again. Impacts for the Windward Islands. Truthfully, Mr. Man JJ, right now, I'm only anticipating very low-end tropical impacts, just some gusty winds. And I'm not talking 40, 50 miles an hour. I mean just like 20, 35, maybe approaching tropical depression threshold in your strongest thunderstorms. I really do not see this thing getting going until we are beyond the Lesser Antilles and into the Caribbean. Truthfully, that's what my gut tells me. Looking at all the data, looking at everything going on with the pattern, with the peak of the hurricane season, climatology, I can see this being a situation just like we've seen with many August and September storms. If they're going to cruise the Caribbean, they're going to get going once they get into the Caribbean. Once they get in there. We saw it with Ian, we saw it with Wilma, we saw it with Charlie, we saw it with Ivan, we saw it with plenty of systems where they really got going. Maybe not Ivan. I do believe Ivan got going earlier, just before the windwards. So bad example. But I do think between 70 and 80 west is when this thing has a quality starting lineup. Right now, we're just going to wait and see how the monsoonal trough breaks down and how it folds over. But yeah, guys, that's it. That's all we watch, or that's all we got. Brenda Erdem, beautiful good afternoon. Nazario, good afternoon to you as well. Thank you very much for tuning in, guys. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and I hope you do, in this kind of a situation, unleash the comments, flood the comments section. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what kind of questions you got. Tell me what's on your mind. I'm going to be busy this weekend, obviously, because it's a holiday weekend, and I will be gearing up to take the hot seat with WKMG in the studio come this next Tuesday. So if we do live streams over this weekend, they may be some of the final live streams here on the Weather Center before taking the chair at Channel 6. So after this weekend, if we do have a system to watch, I definitely encourage you guys tune in to us, and we'll be talking very closely about what's going on in the Caribbean and here, especially in the Sunshine State of Florida, and for all of our neighbors in the Bahamas and along the Gulf Coast line. So again, highly encourage you to drop some comments. Let me know where you're tuning in from, because we have a lot of people on the game board here, and I want to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear what questions you have, and I will definitely try my best to answer everything that you got. April Claremont, a great question. I know that for my schedule of events next week, they're giving me free time in the Weather Center. I love that too. When I saw the email come out, I was so hyped. Said free time in the Weather Center, and I was like, Weather Center Nazario in the Weather Center. I want to put that on Instagram so bad for you guys to see, and I probably will, but I want to say if I'm going to have time to make content on Tuesday and the rest of the week, it'll probably be later in the afternoon, and then I'm slated to be training with Mr. Jonathan Kagis on Thursday and Friday late in the day. It'll be evening shifts for us, so we'll probably be doing our evening live streams on Thursday and Friday, talking tropics with you guys, which I'm so pumped to work together with them and put some information out for you guys, especially if we do have something promising to track. Southeast Texas, Golf Nut, with that first system, yeah. With this, I don't really think so. I really don't, Golf Nut, to tell you the truth. The feeling in my bones with this, I can't see Texas and even Louisiana being in play. We'll have to watch, obviously. We'll have to watch. But where you can see right now the general consensus, the funnel and the convergence of our ensembles are pretty much the state of Florida. Pretty much the state of Florida. Right in through there, we have some very, very subtle outliers that try to make a run for. I mean, we're talking maybe 2 to 3 members that make a run for Louisiana. 2 to 3 out of our 51. I'm not really paying too much attention to it, but of course, we have plenty of time to watch. My daughter had to go to the hospital. I hope she's okay, Amanda. Please keep us updated on that as well. Let us know where to watch your broadcast. Clean image detailing, absolutely, guys. I'm going to be plugging the heck out of that thing. This spaghetti, yeah, Isaac, I do agree. I'm not even going to read your comment, but I do agree. Golf Nut, you're very welcome. And everybody, yeah, we'll talk again very soon. We'll see you again, potentially tomorrow, if not Sunday. I'll break live when we have even more pressing information to talk about. I'm still trying to wander through this conservatively, but the main reason I wanted to jump live in early today is because this is very familiar territory for us Floridians. That's the big thing, so we're just going to keep watching. we're just going to keep watching, and we'll see you again soon. Please feel free to drop me a comment in the comment section down below. I will happily get back to you at my earliest convenience. Chad Cowan, the OHC is huge. I'm just going to put it that way. The OHC is huge. I don't think I'll end the live stream on that note as I get ready to close out. Let's see, where are we? Ocean Heat Suite. Right here, whenever the page populates, there you go. So it goes without saying, yeah. There you go. That's why I say it's high. It's very high. I'm not going to break it down to a numerical value. I'm just going to say it's up there. It's going to be wandering through this area as it starts to develop. So that's why I am concerned with the sudden notification by the models that there could be a phase of rapid intensification. But that's it, guys. Once again, please consider clicking that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Drop me a like, drop me a comment, let me know where you're watching from, and any kind of questions that may be on your mind as we approach the peak of the hurricane season, a potentially significant system moving through the Caribbean. I'm happy to answer any and all questions, comments, and concerns you may have. And guys, stay tuned for more. We'll talk to you again very soon. But until next time, this is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.